I was ordained a priest in 1988, and I went to Eastern Africa, assigned to Western Tanzania. I engaged in a lot of development work, medical, educational. Then in 1994, the Rwandan genocide broke out, about 6 hours west of where I was based, and 1.5 million refugees came into Tanzania from that conflict. The Society of African Missions assigned personnel to go and to help the people to deal with their issues in the aftermath of that conflict, particularly dealing with issues of trauma, which involves the psychological, the spiritual, the emotional, and the actual physical effects of conflict. And as you can understand, in those type of environments, it's extremely difficult for social and religious values to take deep root, for people to live normal lives.
Exactly.
Secondly, in those environments, it's also practically impossible to have any sustainable development, because periodically schools, religious institutions, hospitals, etc., become inoperable. So are we forever going to pour money into just dealing with the symptoms of conflict, the symptoms of poverty, etc., or do we really begin to tackle the underlying causes?
Exactly.
And on that basis, Shalom was set up, the Shalom Center for Conflict Resolution and Reconciliation. Now, we had a few conditions. First of all, that we would be inter-religious,
Yes.
people from all faiths. Secondly, we really wanted people very well qualified in either peace studies, political science, development, comparative religion, that whole area.
Yes.
And thirdly, everyone that joins Shalom has to commit to work behind the lines in the conflict zone. So we are working at the moment up along the northern Kenya border with Ethiopia, South Sudan, Uganda, and then veering over towards the Somali community in eastern Kenya. So a lot of the issues in those conflicts concern core resources, natural resources and their management, cultural variation, the lack of institutions to help people meet their basic human needs and to actualize their potential, proliferation of small arms. Like the environments where we work, there might be 2 AK-47s per family.
That's right.
And when you don't have the institutions there, people and cultures form their own institutions, and sometimes their behavior undermines basic human rights.
What are they afraid of, Father?
Well, I mean, the big concerns for people are around issues of survival. Then you have territorial issues, which are about natural resources. So the first thing we did was set about identifying the key influential opinion shapers and to bring them into a process where we began to give them some peace-building techniques on moving from a situation of manifest violence to negative peace. Now, as we engaged in that process, we had a second dynamic at work, where we decided to research the root causes of these conflicts.
Exactly.
So we engage with both sides independently to do the research. Now, over a course of 2 years, we had the training done on each side, then we had the research findings, then we go back with the findings to see, do they own them on both sides? And only then do we start to bring them together. And out of that process, then we bring them into problem-solving workshops. So first of all, we do training on the analytical skills to really help the people analyze what's causing the conflict with their neighbor. Now that involves 3 paradigms. One is on realism,
Yes.
which is about the use of power. And power is always about attaining your security and interests. And if you cannot achieve it by positive manipulation, you will revert to threats, sanctions, and ultimately to coercion,
yes.
the use of violence.
Yes.
Now, the other way of analysing is to look at it from a structural point of view. What are the institutions that are not enabling the people to meet their basic human needs and to actualise their potential? When you engage with the people, for example, they may say that the cause of the problem is cattle rustling. But really, cattle rustling is only a symptom of the lack of institutions such as law and order, legal redress, medical, educational.
Exactly.
Common things that we all take for
basic
granted in the
needs.
West. But I have never met a parent yet in any of the conflict environments where I've worked that didn't want a better future for their children or for their community.
Exactly.
There's more than enough in these environments for everybody's need, but not for everybody's greed. So a lot of conflict is contingent on how the environment, I don't mean the mountains and the lakes, but the general environment is impacting on the psychological needs of people in terms of their basic human needs and also in terms of their ontological needs. They all interplay to a certain degree. Then after that, there's a need to help begin to evaluate what really needs to be done to transform their manifest, which is their physical direct conflict, to a situation of negative peace. And trauma comes in here in a big way, because at the personal dimension, we have to look at issues from the psychological point of view, the spiritual, and the emotional. And then we move them on to the relational level. And the relational level has to do with behavior, stereotyping, communication, and to see what needs to be transformed in that regard. Thirdly, we begin to work with them what needs to be transformed in their conflict environment in terms of institutions to meet these basic human needs and actualize their potential. And the fourth dimension in the conflict transformation process is to look at culture itself, to see what aspects of their culture are legitimizing violence. And the other dimension is the issue of religious ideological extremism.
Oh, yes.
It's not an issue throughout the whole of Africa by any means, but there are areas, as you know from the media, you have issues with Boko Haram in Nigeria, you have issues with Al-Shabaab, and then we all know what's happening in the Middle East. It's on the news every day. If we can bring each other to live in peace, you're free to find your own way to God, whatever way you wish. To impose religion on anybody is not a healthy or institutional thing. And I mean, on this point of religion and conflict, I think it's important to say that one of the kernel issues that has to be addressed is the issue of when the institution becomes more important than the message. And religion, may I say also, is not the underlying cause of conflict, but it becomes a major factor energizing conflict. Energizing conflict when the institution becomes more important than the message.
That is so well said, Von. Really.
You know, we have talked about the analysis from a paradigmal perspective in the conflict transformation. So imagine that happening on both sides. Now it's then that we bring the representatives of both communities. First of all, you have to bear in mind we have achieved an agreement from both of them to negative peace, that the violence stops. Now the next issue then that they have to address and name and listen to each other very attentively is the issue of truth. And we think that we know the truth until we hear the other side. Then we lead them into looking at the issue of injustice. In any conflict you'll find there has been injustice on both sides. And then fourthly, you have to bring people to face the issue of mercy. It's so easy for any conflict to revert back to manifest violence again.
Mercy and grace.
Now, when tolerance begins to move to fundamentalism, when a group believes that their view is right and all other views are wrong, now we're beginning to enter into dangerous territory. And that fundamentalism can be negatively radicalized further. We begin to move to non-violent extremism. And when we get to the level of non-violent extremism, we don't want to listen to each other or have honest debate. You know, you have all the talk about half-truths, mendacious news and so on. It's not always that people are lying, but they're not telling the full truth. When that non-violent extremism gets negatively radicalized further, it emerges in manifest violent acts of terrorism. And it's very important that we understand that continuum, particularly in relation to religious ideological extremism. At the table of reconciliation, may I add, there is a lot of trauma present in the room, people suffering from the effects. They have lost family members, husbands, sons. Displacement has happened in these environments. I have watched it many, many times, and communities are having to move out of their area. And as I said earlier, you really can't have any sustained development in those areas. And of course, Carol, we are always dealing in these conflict environments with the issue of dissidence, because there's always some group that see benefits for them in manifest violent behavior. And we have to be always able to counter them.
Exactly. Exactly. Do you find maybe a generational thing inside them that just locks in and just can't loosen? Do you think that might be?
Well, there's no overnight solution to it. But at least society should begin to develop the institutions
Exactly.
to help people to deal
Absolutely.
with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Absolutely,
And
it does.
even in terms of our military, I would always say to them, the screening of who they take on board is very
Exactly.
important as well.
I think so too.
Yeah, because the effect afterwards on themselves individually, on families, needs to be addressed.
Well, what I noticed also is that, like my dad was brought up in a very religious home,
Yes.
but then when they take this sensitive person and put him in that kind of conflict, World War II, he has such a battle inside of him.
Yes.
I was just taught all this, and now I'm doing this. How do I reconcile with that?
The human beings in the conflicts where we work, they're the very same as people all over the world.
Exactly.
There's a variation, of course, between all human beings, but a lot of the time they're left to depend on their own cultural mechanisms.
And a lot of the times, like what you're doing is an amazing job. We need a lot of what you have right here, because we need certain kinds of syllabuses, like I said, in the
I
schools.
totally agree with you. Peace studies should be part of all high school here in America,
Yes.
at that level as well. Of course, many universities now have adopted peace studies. Sometimes it's called peace studies or conflict transformation, international relations. But it's so, so important going forward. And I remember being invited in with the Shalom team to help in a town called Isiolo in Kenya,
Yes.
and bringing together a group of 18 Muslim leaders from different groups within the Muslim community,
Yes.
and gathering 17 Christian leaders from all the different main denominations
amazing.
into a room to see what could we do in that environment, because there was a lot of tension. It wasn't always about religion, but there was interethnic issues, and then there's the general political economy that goes with elections and power and so on. I wasn't sure exactly how to start, to be quite honest about it. They were all gathered, and I would say they were pretty defensive in their analysis about what this workshop would do, and I don't know how positive they were, but I remember very well that morning standing in front of them, and the first thing I said was, I think we can all agree we ain't going to have lunch at 1 o'clock.
Yes.
Because our Muslim
Exactly.
brothers and sisters will wish to pray at that time.
Oh, yes.
And then asking the
5 times a
Christians,
day.
would they be willing to do the same pray? And furthermore, asking the Christians gathered during their prayer, would they be willing, just for this occasion anyhow, to pray? Well, we should all pray for the goodness of all humanity, to pray for our Muslim brothers and sisters, that they would be blessed continually with the divine presence, and for their health and success and happiness,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But not to get totally focused in any manner or means on just looking at them and start praying that they become Christians.
No.
So this was about an openness. And then I turned to the Muslims and I said, when you have your ritual prayers done, would you be willing to pray for the Christians? And for that they'll all be blessed with the divine presence, and
Yes.
not this divine, but the divine presence of the Almighty, and for their happiness and success and well-being, and not to be just looking at them and be thinking, how do you make them Muslims? Of course, they all agreed, and we ended up with a wonderful workshop. They set up a Shalom committee among them at the end, and Isiolo had a great experience of peace leading up to the elections, through the elections, and afterwards.
That
So
must
it's
have
a simple
felt
thing, but it took a lot of
like
work.
such a
A lot of work,
healing.
to get everybody to, in terms again of the analysis, the transformation, and the reconciliation processes.
So the people that had gone through it before were probably delighted to see that
Yes.
transformed
Yeah.
into that.
And we're not coming in like from the top down.
Yes.
It's really empowering them to be the architects of their own future,
Yes.
giving them the skill sets and the techniques.
Exactly, exactly.
Mm.
Fair elections without
I know
violence.
Kenya, I have seen a lot of progress over the years, and I'm very, very optimistic going forward what's happening in many countries in Eastern Africa. They are doing their best. We should remember that a lot of these
Exactly.
countries, they only have had a chance the last 100 years in terms to develop the institutions we often take for granted.
Yes.
They're in a process of development.
Of course.
There's issues of ethnicity, and it'll take a while to get the institutions right, because we
Yes.
know here in this country or any other country, if the institutions aren't strong, mankind can find the window of corruption.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's progress, not perfection.
Ideology will take a while to take deep root in terms of democracy in
Yes.
many countries, because a lot of elections aren't really about ideology. It's more about ethnic mathematics still. But it's getting better all the time. I mean, it's mind-boggling, the
Isn't it?
talent that's coming to the surface in Africa. And going forward, I'm hoping that the institutions in a lot of the countries will develop rapidly,
Yes.
because it's going to have to deal with the external causes of conflict, because
Exactly.
a lot of the Western world and in the Eastern world, they're looking for the resources in Africa. And so a lot of the time what's causing conflict in Africa is not internally or domestically driven. It's usually a combination of both. So, but it's the reality, because Africa is over 3 times the size of the United States.
Yes.
That gives you an idea of the
It's huge.
area-wise. And I don't believe in this, you know. I meet people sometimes, oh, people should be left this way and just leave them. Not at all. We should educate people to decide about their own future and help them to develop their society the way they wish.
So important, and it's so incredible to hear how this has all evolved,
Sure.
and how much education does to help the people
Exactly.
understand. And when I set out, I put all the major religions on the poster, and it was so simple.
Yeah.
But you know, when I think about that and having you here
Yes.
to express what was always in my head somewhere,
Sure.
that we could get along, and pray in each of your faiths for world peace. Love all your brothers and sisters in all the world.
All right.
It's not that hard.
I love, you know, the line that Jesus said in Luke chapter 19, verse 41. It was about his entry into Jerusalem, but he looked down on Jerusalem and he wept and said, if only today you would know what makes for peace. And until we really begin to bring peace studies more and more into the educational process, and now more than ever, that we begin to reconcile and respect and care for our environment, to meet our own needs in the here and now, but also for future generations. The greatest expression of love is to really be people of forgiveness and care.